acknowledge that we were founded on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Attawandaronk, the Mississauga and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and now live on land that is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We have many representatives working across this land now known as Ontario, and we acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory. We are grateful to be able to work and live on this land, and thankful to the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial, and who continue to contribute to the strength of Ontario and to all communities across the province. To continue to center reconciliation, we encourage our team, partners, students, and teachers to take time to learn about the lands they are currently on. Visit native-land.ca for more information.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual field trip. My name is Madison, and I'm the Education Coordinator at Eggscape. Eggscape, Let's Talk Science, and Heinzseed are excited to put on this event to dive into the science of tomato breeding during Canadian Agriculture Literacy Month. Today, we're going to be talking about all things tomato, such as how the perfect tomatoes are made for products such as your ketchup, as well as talk about tomatoes in outer space, because why not? We would love to hear from those of you that are watching, so please put any questions or comments you have into the chat. Our scientists today would love to answer any questions that you have. So before we get started, I'd love to introduce you to Shelley from Let's Talk Science, a national organization that brings engaging science learning to students across Canada. Shelley, welcome.
Hi, Madison. Hi, everyone. So my name is Shelley. I'm from Let's Talk Science. And as Madison said, we're a nonprofit in Canada that creates programs and resources to help teachers bring STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math to life in your classrooms. And we're so excited to be part of this virtual field trip with you all today. One of the coolest projects my team gets to work on is Tomatosphere. So I think Madison has a cool picture that she can share with you all. Tomatosphere is an experiment that's been going on since 2001, and it explores how space travel affects the germination of tomato seeds, so how tomato plants might grow if those seeds have been to space. Something we couldn't do if we didn't have a few partners, one of which is Heinzseed, which we will be learning more about today. And one of the hybrid seed varieties that they grow is the one that we send to space as part of the experiment. And I can't wait to hear all about how these tomato varieties are created. So let's get started with Kelsie.
All right, awesome. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Kelsie, who is a tomato breeder from Heinzseed and our expert scientist today. Kelsie, please take over. Feel free to introduce yourself and what you do. And yeah, we can get into learning all about breeding and how you grow your tomatoes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you guys today. I just arrived back in Canada. I was in Chile evaluating tomato trials until yesterday. So I just got back in time to be here with you today. So as Madison said, I'm a tomato breeder. I work with Heinzseed. And I am based in Canada, Leamington, Ontario, actually. So anyone close to there, that's where I'm located right now. And though I live in Canada and I do my breeding in Canada, I'm actually what we call an international breeder. So I breed tomatoes for all over the world. So some of my largest markets are in Europe and South America. So I spend a lot of my time traveling to different markets all over the world to see how the tomatoes are growing, in those markets and make decisions for them. I am a processing tomato breeder. So if you're thinking about tomatoes that you see in the grocery store, things like that, unfortunately, that's not what I do. I breed tomatoes they're grown in the field, processing tomatoes. They're typically machine harvested, and they then go to a processor and they get made into all sorts of different types of products. I have a couple here just to sort of give examples. You get like diced tomatoes. These ones are made in Kingsville, Ontario. Things like pizza sauce, pasta sauce, and then I think Madison already mentioned it, but like the best one ever is ketchup. So that's the sort of things that processing tomatoes kind of go into, the products that you probably have in your homes. I wish that I was coming to you today from a beautiful field of tomatoes so I could walk you through the field and sort of show you the things I do in the summer. It's a little bit cold for that. If we had tomatoes out there right now, they would die in the cold. So I'm coming to you from our seed room today. And we are actually just getting prepared in the next couple weeks to start seeding. So this is sort of an example of like a box of seeds. We plant about 3,000 individual varieties in our field trials every summer. So it's a lot of logistics, a lot of getting the seeds all together. But this is typically what a seed packet looks like with the seeds in it. To go back to tomatoes, I do have some videos. I was able to take some videos of our winter greenhouse to sort of show you the process of how we actually make hybrid seeds. So hybrid seeds are a cross between two distinctively genetic parent lines. Those parents are inbreds. So if you know that term, inbred, their genetics are completely fixed. So there's no genetic diversity in those parents. And so when we cross them together, we can produce a hybrid that has unique, repeatable genetic profile. And then we can, if that hybrid is excellent, we can sell that hybrid all over the world to different processors and different growers that want to grow it. So I think, Madison, we can probably cue into the first video. So the first video is me a few weeks back in our greenhouse, sort of just giving you an example of how to actually physically make hybrid tomato seed and how we do that in our greenhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a really good question in the chat.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm thinking we answered it, so I think it's a good one to start with, and then I'll put that video up.
I love questions.
So the question is, you said you're a tomato breeder. There's more than one type of tomato?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you for that. Yes, there are many, many different types of tomatoes. So I know that most people, if you were to walk into a field of tomatoes, you think they're just tomatoes. But to me, as a tomato breeder, they're all unique, distinct genetic individuals. So because I'm the one that makes some tomatoes, I like to think of them as like my children in some ways. So they're different genetically. I know that if you don't have a lot of experience, you could look at a tomato and just think it's a tomato. But to me, I see different size of tomato, different flavor of tomato, maybe the color when you cut the tomato open could be like really excellent, beautiful color, or it could be kind of like orangey brown. You could have a large tomato vine that is like 10 feet wide. You could have a super tiny tomato plant that's like 2 feet wide. And then those tomatoes could have, what else? Different chemistry. So in processing tomatoes, which is what I do, the chemistry of the tomatoes is very important. We like tomatoes with very high sugar content. And we also like tomatoes that are very viscous, if you know that term, or thick. So if you imagine cutting a tomato open and squeezing it, if a lot of water comes out of it, that would be like a thin sort of tomato variety, not very viscous. Our tomatoes, when you cut it open and squeeze it, we like no water to come out. So it's super thick. So it's going to make a product like ketchup that's not super runny. It's nice and thick. So there are a million different characteristics. If you really sit down and look at a tomato, there are hundreds of different characteristics that make them very, very different from each other.
Amazing. That is really cool. All right. That's perfect. Yeah, keep sending your questions in the chat, please. We'll go into the first video, and then Kelsie will have time to answer some more questions.
Awesome. Okay, I'm here in our research greenhouse, and this is where we make hybrid seed for our new hybrids that we want to test in the field for our seed company. So if you look in here, this is what a tomato flower looks like. So if you grow tomatoes at home, this is what you'll be used to seeing in your garden. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about tomato flowers. So one of the really cool things about them is that they're actually hermaphrodites. So what that means is that a tomato flower has both male and female reproductive parts. So I can sort of show you a little bit right now, but the male part, if I pull these off, the male part of the flower is called the stamen, and it's this kind of circular piece right here, and that stamen is what makes pollen. These are individual anthers, and these make pollen. And then the female part of the flower is actually up through the center, and that's called the pistil. So if you grow tomatoes at home, what will happen is this will self-fertilize. If we don't do anything to it, the male part of the flower will pollinate the female part of the flower, and then it will grow into a tomato. So at home or in your garden or in a field of tomatoes, either wind or a bee or a butterfly, another bug will land on either the flower or the stem, and that will cause the pollen to fall off of the anthers and pollinate the female part of the flower, which is the pistil, which is in the middle. Now, because we want to make hybrids, the first thing we want to do here is we want to stop this flower from fertilizing itself. What we want to do is we want to have a female plant. So in this case, in this demonstration, this is my female plant, and we want to cross it with a plant all the way on the other side of the greenhouse, which is going to be our male plant. So to do that, the first step is what we call an emasculation, and that basically means we're removing the male part of the plant. So if we remove the male part of the plant, then the flower can no longer fertilize itself. So that's what we want to do. So I'm just looking for a flower. This one here looks good. So the first thing is I need to make sure that I emasculate this flower before it opens. Once it's open, like this last flower we were looking at, the pollen is already mature. So there's a good chance this is already self-fertilized, and I would have no way of knowing it. So this flower is no good. We need to get them at this stage when they're almost mature, but I'm certain that right now the pollen is not already fertilized this flower. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove these, mostly to get them out of the way. And then you have to have very, very steady hands to do this. But if you do it enough times, it becomes easy. And then what I did, that part that just fell off, that was all the male part of the flower. That was the stamen that made up the pollen anthers. So now what you can see really clearly here is this is the female part of the flower, and it's called a stigma right here at the top. The whole thing is called a pistil, but right there at the top, that's the stigma. That's the part that we need to make sure we get pollen to so that this will grow into a tomato. Okay. So now that we have our female flower ready to be fertilized, we have to go collect some pollen on the other side of the greenhouse. Okay. So to collect pollen, it's almost the opposite of with the female, where the female was closed and the pollen wasn't mature. In this case, we want the flowers nice and open so that we know that they're going to have nice mature pollen for us to collect. So what I have here is, this is what we call a pollen, it's just a tube. And where, if you can get a close up of that, you can see that there's nothing in there. It's just like a black sort of empty tube. Can you focus on that?
I'm trying.
Right.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so to collect pollen, I'm going to try and get it in this tube. Get close up here. So what I want to do in this case is we have the male part where all the pollen is. I'm just going to sort of stick that down into the tube. Hold it in there. It's a little bit hard while we're trying to film. And then this is actually an old electric toothbrush. This is going to act like our bumblebee because it vibrates. So this is what a bumblebee would do in nature, but in this case it's an old toothbrush. And I'm just going to vibrate it along the flower. And that is going to cause the pollen to drop off the anthers and into this tube. Okay, so now when I take it out, if you can look in there, I can punch it up. Do you see all that pollen in there? So now we have some pollen collected. That's not quite enough pollen to do a pollination, so I'm just going to do that really quickly to a few more flowers so that we have some pollen in here. This is very satisfying to do. You can almost see the pollen dropping right out of the tip of the flower there. Okay, and now let's look. If I push that up gently, we have a nice collection of pollen. Okay, now I can turn the toothbrush on, and we'll go back over to our female, and I'll show you how we actually fertilize. Okay, so here's the female right here that we just emasculated. And we left it, and as I said, remember that whole thing is the female reproductive, but the most important is that right at the tip there, we need to get that coated with pollen. So if you have very steady hands and a lot of practice, you can dip that right into our pollen. And now if you look, you can see the white right on the tip there of that. Now we know that's a fertilized female flower. in about a week, if I've pollinated that successfully, that's going to start to grow into a tomato. So we can peek down this row here, and you can see these are, right here, some of our other female plants. And you can see that these have all been successfully fertilized and they're growing into tomatoes. Now these ones are probably pollinated about 2 weeks ago, and that's kind of about the size you'll see. So it takes some time for them to grow and mature. The other important thing to remember is that this is still a female plant. What's actually the hybrid is the seeds inside each one of these tomatoes. So our next step for our breeding program, now that we've made all of these hybrids in here, I don't know if you can see, but it's quite a large greenhouse. We have about 300 new hybrids being made in this greenhouse. So once the fruit get red, what we do is we collect them and we harvest the seed. So I can take you out to the other part of the greenhouse and give you a quick rundown on how we do that.
Or me too.
All right, awesome. That was an amazing video, and I hope everyone liked it as much as I did. I had no idea that's how we could pollinate plants. We can do it ourselves. So thank you so much for taking that video for us. Is there anything you'd like to say? We do have a lot of questions from the chat, but was there anything you want to say about that video?
I'm glad you found it so cool. I also, every time I watch, I mean, even though I've been doing this for 15 years, I watch that video and I think, man, science is just amazing. I love what we do. I'm happy to take questions, and I would encourage, like you said, if you have tomatoes in your backyard and you're growing them at home, you could absolutely do that yourself. All you need is some tweezers and like a little something to collect the pollen into, like a petri dish or something like that, or a super tiny piece of Tupperware. You could absolutely try to do that yourself. I would encourage you to try.
Oh my goodness, all the students will be outside with their toothbrushes. All right. Okay, so let's do some questions.
Sure.
One is, can you pick these flowers and do they go away once they breed and make a tomato?
Yes. So the flowers themselves, once they're fertilized, the sort of pieces of petal will disappear. They'll fall off naturally, and it will grow into a tomato. So if you look at a tomato plant, in the early summer, you see all those flowers. If you imagine what it's going to look like in a few weeks or a month, every single flower, if it is fertilized, is going to turn into a tomato. And in our case, in that greenhouse, once they turn into a tomato and they're ripe and ready, what we do is we actually pick them and we harvest the seeds. And we're going to show you that in the next video.
Perfect. All right. So another question. When you say hybrid, do you mean with other tomatoes or with other fruits and vegetables?
That's a great question. So you have to make a hybrid, we cross two different genetic lines of tomato together. And so I think I mentioned earlier, those parents are what we call inbred lines. And so tomatoes have, just like humans actually, tomatoes have 2 copies of every single chromosome in their genome. They have 12 sets of chromosomes, whereas humans have 23 sets. So for an inbred, or those parents that I was talking about, the male and the female, when I say they're inbred, it means every single gene on every single one of their chromosomes is identical. So there's no diversity in their genetics, and that's super important. So if they're not diverse, when we cross them together, we're always going to get the exact same hybrid because there's really no genetic diversity to segregate. But no, we can't cross tomatoes with other things. There are other species that are closely related to tomatoes, like peppers and things like that. And you can sometimes use some really interesting scientific techniques to combine genetics from other crops, but typically we don't do that. That's sort of very early research that typically you see done more at universities and things like that.
Right. That would be fun. All right. Another question from Amanda. Her student would like to know, what time of year do you start tomato breeding and planting?
Oh, that's a great question. It really depends on where you are in the world. As I mentioned, I'm an international breeder. But for Canada, since we're talking about Canada, we are actually going to start seeding all of our tomatoes for the field in the next 2 weeks. So typically the beginning of April, we start seeding. We'll seed trials for about a month, and then they will get transplanted into the fields. So they stay in the greenhouse for the first 6 weeks. And then they'll get moved out into the fields, planted in the fields, anywhere from about mid-May to the end of June for Canada. And then they'll be out in the fields from the second we put them out there, mid-May to June, until about Thanksgiving time. So the first few weeks of October, that's when it starts to get too cold for tomatoes and we get frost. And if there's a frost event in Canada, that will kill the tomatoes. Tomatoes love heat. They do not love the cold. So anywhere from May to just the beginning sort of part of October, that's when you're going to see them in the fields.
Awesome. All right, let's do a couple more here. All right, how many new breeds of tomatoes do you make per year?
Oh, that's a great question. So I make about 300 new hybrids every single year.
Wow.
I design which parents I want to cross, which ones I think are going to be good hybrids. But sort of that's really the part of my job. I design the hybrids, and then over the course of about 5 years, we narrow them down, and only about 1 or 2 of those 300 crosses will ever actually become commercially available for sale. So we only take the best of the best. It's like a survival of the fittest. 300 hybrids, the best 1 or 2 are ever actually going to be sold commercially.
Wow, so you work really hard to make sure that you can, get at least 1 or 2 in there.
Yes. If I'm a successful breeder, at least 1 or 2 are going to be good enough to go and sell to all over the world, to different processors and different growers. They're going to want them.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome. We have another question about the pollination here. How many times do you need to pollinate? Does the procedure change the entire plant?
How many times do we need to pollinate? That's a great question. Like per flower, we would only pollinate that 1 time. So each flower we pollinate it once, and it's either successful or it's unsuccessful. If it's a good pollination, like I sort of said in the video, after about a week, you'll start to see that female reproductive part just swell just a little bit, and then it'll get bigger and bigger and turn into a tomato. If it was an unsuccessful pollination, that female part will just turn black and it will fall off the plant. So how many times we pollinate an individual plant really depends on how much seed we need. So because of our research, we have a lot of metrics that tells us every time we pollinate a tomato, on average, when we cut that tomato open and collect the seeds, we get about 18 seeds per fruit. So if I decide that I need, 300 seeds to meet our trialing needs, they'll pollinate. They'll say, hey, okay, well, we get 18 seeds per fruit. We need to pollinate to get this many fruit. They just do the math. We need this many fruit. So what they'll do is they'll just keep pollinating a female plant until they have the fruit that they need to get the amount of seeds I've sort of requested. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, we have we have a lot of questions, which is great. So keep sending them in, please, students and teachers. I'm thinking, though, maybe we can go into the next video and then do another round of questions after that.
Sure.
All right. Do you want to preface this video with anything or go right into it?
I think we can go right into it. It sort of flows right from the last video, so we should be good.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Good? Okay. Now I'm out in our other part of the greenhouse, and you can see here, this is actually what was harvested today from those female plants. So these are all tomatoes that we pollinated by hand using pollen from one male to the female. And then when the fruits are ready, we harvest them. You can see in here, there's a tag, and that identifies that this group of tomatoes is from a very particular cross. It's super important that we know exactly which male and exactly which female was used for each cross, and we have to track that so we know which seeds are which when we get them planted out into the field. So what our team will do, no one's working right now, but what our team will do is they'll actually cut these tomatoes open, and they'll use just like an extractor, and they'll pull the seeds out by hand. So it looks like that video might have dropped, unfortunately.
Sorry about that. I will try to get it back up. In the meantime,
I can talk through the process if we can't get the video back up. It's not too...
Sure.
Okay.
That sounds good. We'll see if we can get it back up. But
No problem. But basically what we do is those tomatoes, our team, my awesome research technicians here, what they do is they cut those tomatoes open. They like physically pull the seeds out and they add an enzyme to it, which helps sort of break down the tomato pulp. It's called pectinase. Breaks down the pectin so that the seeds kind of release from like the pulpy part of the tomato. And then they do a series of washing those seeds until you end up with relatively clean seeds without any tomato pulp in it. And then we do what is called an acid extraction. So that's just a sanitization treatment, and it's like industry standard. You can't ship seeds across any international borders unless they've been acid treated. That acid kills any bacteria or fungus or any diseases that might be on those seeds. The seeds need to be really clean because we don't want to transfer diseases like between different fields or between different countries. That would be a terrible thing for us to do. So we make sure the seeds are cleaned with an acid treatment that basically sterilizes them. And then once they're sterilized, they get dried. And we actually just use like a dryer, like a clothes dryer that you would have at your house. So the seeds are wet from the treatment, and then they get spun with no heat because we don't want to cook them, but with no heat in a basically like a commercial clothes dryer that you would use at home to dry your clothes. And once the seeds are dry, you end up.
Okay.
Oh,
Now
the seed
I'm
video's back. Oh.
Sorry about this. Yeah, is there anywhere on the video you would like me to go to, or would you like to just keep talking about it?
I'll just keep talking about it, honestly.
Sounds good. Yeah, keep going.
There wasn't too much left in the video, to be honest. It was just showing you the clothes dryer, how we put the seeds in there and we dry them in there. Once they come out, they end up getting brought into our seed room, which is where I'm currently sitting. And they get packaged into a seed packet that has, the label of which hybrid this is. And I can sort of dump this out and kind of show you. Once all the seeds are perfectly clean, maybe if I angle this down a little bit, there we go. They end up like this. And you see our beautiful tomato seeds, nice and clean, no tomato pulp, none of the fruit left, just a nice, beautiful collection of seeds. And those seeds, like I said, we make about 300 new varieties each year. They will get planted starting in April. We'll start seeding them, and they are going to go out into our tomato fields. And I think Madison has some pictures that we can show you. I can show you what the seedlings look like once we sort of started growing them in our greenhouse. Yeah, so that's a tray of seedlings right there, and you can see the little purple tags. Those designate the different varieties. So each little section that's separated by tape there is a different tomato variety. It's really important that we keep them all separate and straight so we know what's getting planted. And then once those grow large enough, and once the weather outside is warm enough that we're certain there's not going to be any frost, which again I said is like May. Yeah, so this is a field in May, right after it's been transplanted. So you get these tiny little tomato seedlings, and then over the course of the summer, they're going to grow. And that's typically what a field looks like right around the beginning of August. You see those plants have filled in. You can also see in the picture here, you can sort of see there's different sections. So you can, I don't know if you can see the back of the one variety. There's like a section where there's no plants, an empty space, and then more plants start. So each like little grouping here is about 30 feet is an individual hybrid. So that's a great picture. So you can see each little section is a different hybrid, and that's my job to go in and evaluate them, narrow those 300 down, and hopefully end up with like the best of the best to then sell across the world.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing about that. We do have some more questions, and I can't believe we're already at 10:30. So we're going to answer some questions, and then Shelly is going to share a little bit more about our tomato seeds in space. So definitely tune in for that. And yeah, that's kind of our plan. So in terms of questions, is it hard to collect the tomatoes in the greenhouse?
It's not too difficult to collect them and harvest them. The main thing is that our team has to pay really close attention and not mix between the different tomatoes coming off the individual female plants. That's the main thing. It's just attention to detail, because we don't want to mix two hybrids together, because then we can't make any decisions about whether it's good or not.
Right. All right. Do you pollinate each one by hand?
Yes, we do. That's a great question. We pollinate just our own hybrids by hand, but also commercially. All tomato hybrids in the world are just hand pollinated. So even when we're making, like, this is 100,000 seeds, this is a unit of tomato seeds. So if you said, hey, I want to buy some Heinzseed, you'd buy it by the unit. A unit is 100,000 seeds. Even these are all made by hand. So they're made in production regions where they bring in thousands of people a day to go in and hand pollinate entire fields of tomatoes. Yes.
Because you said 18 seeds comes from one tomato, and we saw in that 5-minute video before, that's how long the process takes. So students out there, do the math. It's that big of 100,000 seeds. How many tomatoes did that take? Wow.
And that's just one little unit. We sell hundreds of, thousands of units of these. So it's a lot. That's why tomatoes are expensive. If you ever complain about the price of your tomato products, this is why.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. We have a question from a couple people. What's the biggest tomato you've ever come across?
Oh, that's a great question. The biggest tomato hybrid that I've ever made is about 180 grams. So that's like a good size fruit for processing. But the biggest one I've ever seen was like probably over a pound. That was a fresh market, like one that you would slice and eat on a sandwich.
Right. Amazing. All right. Here's a question from Andrea. Our family wants to start growing some plants indoors. What tomatoes would be good for this?
To grow them indoors all year round? That's an interesting question. I would pick a dwarf cherry tomato. So if you're on a seed catalog site and you're looking for, like, what should we buy? Definitely the word dwarf, because that means it's going to be a really tiny determinate plant. You saw from the videos, tomatoes can get really big. So you want it to be a dwarf, and you want it to be a determinate variety, which means it's going to set all its fruit at once and stay kind of containable. That's what I would go with.
Amazing. All right. And this is actually going to have to be our last question. And then we'll go into talking about space a little bit more. Thank you so much for your time so far. Let's see. What's your favorite thing about your job?
Well, I love most things about my job. I would say one of the coolest things about being a tomato breeder and about being in agriculture in general, if anyone's interested in agriculture, is that it's very cyclical. So my job in February is completely different from my job in April, which is completely different from my job in August, and vice versa. So it keeps it really interesting and fresh. It's always changing to the next thing, changing to the next thing. It's not doing the same thing all day, every day. So I really like that.
That's awesome. And I feel like a lot of students watching, that would be something they'd be interested in. Something that changes is always interesting. They're being creative, things like that. So yeah, put that on the list, everyone. Tomato breeder for what you want to be when you grow up. All right. Awesome. Okay, now I'm going to, Kelsie, if you want to say anything else to the group watching, and then I'm going to reintroduce Shelly. But yeah, any wisdom to depart on the students?
No, just thank you so much for tuning in. I love to talk about tomatoes. Usually people don't want to listen, so I'm happy to have such a great audience. And yeah, jobs in agriculture, definitely if you're interested in science. People always think about medical, but there's a whole world of agriculture that involves a lot of science, and it's a great thing to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kelsie, for taking the time. And yeah, I'm going to reintroduce Shelly. Hello, Shelly. How are you? Oh, I think you're muted, potentially. Can I unmute you? There you go.
I was saying it was so interesting, and I was actually doing some side math, because those pillows we showed at the beginning of the tomato seeds in space, that's 500,000 seeds in each of those. They're called pillows when they go up to the space station, which is 28,000 tomatoes would have, like, if it's 18 seeds is for each tomato. So that's a lot of tomatoes that had to be harvested and processed for each of those pillows. So that's really interesting. And it was really cool to learn more about how hybrids are developed for sure. Before we wrapped up this whole thing, I know we're sort of running to the end of the time. I did want to share a short video about Tomatosphere. It's a European Space Agency astronaut, Thomas Pesquet, and he's going to explain a little bit more about what Tomatosphere is all about.
Perfect. All right.
Hi, I'm Thomas Pesquet and welcome aboard the International Space Station. My crew and I arrived in a Russian spaceship called the Soyuz, and it took us 2 days to get here, and I will spend a total of 6 months in my new home in space. So in the future, astronauts will travel to destinations much farther away, like Mars, for example. Their trips could last 2 or 3 years. Before we can travel that far, we need to rise to some important challenges, and we need your help. If you were an astronaut heading to Mars, think about some of the things that you would need to stay healthy. Let's talk about food. Whether on Earth, Mars, or the Moon, we all need fruits and vegetables. But fresh food only lasts about a week. We would never be able to carry enough for a 3-year mission. So we need your help to develop a new skill, space farming. We're already growing lettuce here on the space station, but no salad is complete without tomatoes. Tomatoes are delicious and nutritious. They taste and smell great. Plus, tomato plants could benefit our environment by removing carbon dioxide and adding oxygen and water to the air we breathe. Tomatoes could be a space superfood. And this is where the Tomatosphere comes in. Will tomatoes grow the same in space that they do on Earth? Help us find out. Count how many of your Tomatosphere seeds germinate and send us your results. Who knows? Maybe you will be studying how to grow the food that you will one day eat as an astronaut.
That was so fun.
It's a pretty cool part of our job. So we're super happy. I know a lot of teachers were able to register ahead of time and maybe already got seeds. So if you wanted to participate in the experiment, you absolutely can. Madison has a QR code we can pop up, and that is directly to our website where you can order seeds. They are free to order for teachers across the country. And we have access. You can also access great learning resources from our Let's Talk Science website. So thanks so much for being here today. I'll hand it back over to Madison and Kelsie. If there's any other questions, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I want to just thank everyone again for joining us today. We had a fun time exploring tomato breeding, tomato seeds in space, and of course, further learning. Please sign up for the Tomatosphere program, as you could actually have some of those seeds that Kelsie breeds, and then the space station sends up into space so that you can see if those seeds grow differently than seeds that have not been in space. And maybe you can even eat some of the tomatoes that you end up growing. So yeah, please participate. Feel free to follow Eggscape and just see if we have more events like these coming up in the future. I want to wish you all happy Canadian Agriculture Literacy Month. There's only a couple days left, so please just spend the time learning more about Canadian agriculture. And yeah, anything you guys want to say before we officially sign off?
Well, just thanks so much for being here today. It was great.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Awesome. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining.